The character of Indiana Jones has always fascinated me for more than a decade. I came to its grips around the time when I finished my graduation. Growing up in a middle-class family with no access to Hollywood content, most of my childhood was spent being regaled by the tiny world of Doordarshan. The early 2000s brought the culture of financial prosperity to our nation somewhat, although I believe it's a moot point. Nonetheless, it meant much easier access to Hollywood content that we all craved and admired secretly. Welcome to the Review Diaries, where I view and review the movies and series. Please remember to leave your comments underneath and remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that I could be inspired to post more such contents in future. The fantasy stories told on the Indian channel managed to catch a fancy ever since the television reach grew profoundly. However, due to annoying budgetary constraints, we were fairly disappointed in the use of computer graphics, hindering our imagination of the parallel reality. This was a sour point in the arena of Indian fantasy movies and television. That completely changed, however, when the whole library of movies overbearing with fantasy elements from the wonderland of Hollywood had begun to crawl into our possession. There was no stopping afterwards. For someone who is a true consumer of the singular content that settled into first the tiny frames of a television, and then when the frames grew in size, the satisfaction quotient remained virtually constant. All the setups and actions taking place in the background through computer graphics diligently hollowed class that guided the expansion of our imagination. A great deal of effort went into portraying the scenes, and not just the constitution of people in the foreground that told the story, but the interspersed graphic detailing in the background had a narration of their own. And that narration, with each era-defining movie, just became thorough and eloquent. Indiana Jones entered our lives long before most of my audience was born via a comic strip that focused on the inimitable archaeological prodigy who taught college students by the day and dug memorable experience around the world looking for either the lost treasure or decoding historical conundrum on the sides. He knew many languages and spoke Greek and Latin like it was one of the official languages of the United States. I mean, I've seen him picking up a millennium-old tablet from an archaeological dig. With almost perfect impressiveness, he was able to translate the content, which was illegible at best. Although we know it was a movie and most of it was scripted, but imagine the genesis of the character was done in such a way that his brilliance was not specific to one particular trait. Not many know that he was born Henry Walton Jones Jr. and took his moniker Indiana from his dog as a child. This information would skip you in case you have not watched the third movie. Just like his father Henry Walton Jones Sr., he had an impressive career as an archaeologist, becoming the most respected person in the higher echelons of the government. Apart from solving complex historical mysteries that boggled our minds at the revelation, he was also adept at gunfight and hand-to-hand duel, putting his opponents into a bit of tizzy, oftentimes messing up with their plans. Over the years, the famous comic strip spawned numerous adaptations on big as well as small screen, winning several accolades in its way. A total of 4 movies have released, starting from the first one that came out in 1981. It completed 40 years merely a week ago, and that triggered my obsession to relive the famous series once again. From the graphic fidelity standpoint, the first 3 movies definitely look dated, but the narration continues to fetch our attention in the same fervor it did probably decades ago. I mean, when I watched the first one for the first time several years ago, I had the same feeling watching it again. The building of the suspense, visiting some of the history's fictional lessons, handling of slightly over-the-top archaeological means to extract a bundle of mysteries from the cocoon of the bygone days, and the intoxicating background score. Every tiny shred of the movie spoke to its audience. It was hard to miss the genius makers replicating one sensation after another in the fold, so much so that the first movie on the list has been inducted into the 100 greatest movies of all time by the American Film Institute. Several played the eponymous character, but no one played it with the fervor and passion of Harrison Ford, whose coding performances mesmerized the millions around the world. Even after he grew old and featured in the last of the franchise, his magic spiraled into nothing like before. It seemed the character of Indiana Jones was written keeping his stature in mind. Ask anyone coveting in the spellbinding territory of the Indiana Jones crusade, they would have a delectable account of his enthralling performance. He was perhaps born to do it. None of his other characters that he played over the years could match the conviction he displayed crawling under the skin of Indiana Jones. Marvels and DC have been known to create heroes that are larger than life, mostly equipped with a certain degree of extra powers or superpowers to exhibit their potential as superheroes. They could fly, crawl on the walls, hang plentiful gadgetry, and work with any of the fine nuances of their character, not just to extol their virtues, but also to help them to keep the thriving crime of the enemies under check. But for Indiana Jones, the only superhero-like quality he ever had was mostly his brain, which made him impregnable against his enemies. Just like Superman and Spider-Man, he lived dual lives. When he put on his frames, he would assume the mental of a professor who behaved and acted like any other normal professor of his time. However, the moment the captivating life filled with adventure opened the gates to another archaeological hunt, a newer identity of Indiana Jones would spring up, or contrary to his personality that bloomed in the public eye. Now, I won't project him as a god by saying that there were no fallible moments in his adventures. There were plenty of them, but in the end he would fabricate an astounding escape by using the environment judiciously. He was not rich or bore any special powers, therefore he had to rely on the abundance of his surroundings to overpower his enemies or scoop himself out of a precarious situation. In that, there are similarities with the characters boldly portrayed by Jackie Chan. Now, with the announcement of the 5th movie in the series, which is due for release next year, we hope that it continues to live up to our expectations. Little details have been spared by the production house, but it seems like few surprises are in order for the viewers when the movie comes out next year. One thing is certain, the character of Indiana Jones will continue to hold a special place in our heart, even if the makers decide to reboot the series and introduce a new lead one day. Although it would be somewhat amiss about replacing Harrison Ford. I'm sure with his biological clock not making him any younger, certain hard changes are expected in the future if the longevity of the fictional characters is at the center of a focus. Thank you.